Okay, let me just go to the. Okay. Sorry, it just takes me a second here because there's so many windows and things that I have open. Oh, okay, there we go. So hi everybody. My name's Debbie Stine. Thanks so much for attending this. Um, just as kind of background, as part of my consulting practice, I do policy analysis, program evaluation, community engagement activities pretty much every single day in some form or another. So I don't just teach this stuff, I actually do what it is that I'm teaching you about. So I think that's really important. Also, I spent about 5 years working for the state of Texas before I went into the federal government, which is where I was most of my career. And now I'm based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I handle a lot of state and local issues here, both in Pennsylvania and Western Pennsylvania, and also in West Virginia, where I do a lot of consulting, and also in South Carolina, which is an area that I've started to do more work recently. So it really helps me if you do introduce yourself in chat. So I hope you will go ahead and just tell me just a little bit about yourself and what your activities are, what it is that you do, maybe what kind of these things you do, policy analysis, program evaluation, community engagement, or maybe it's just something that you're thinking about doing in the future. So with that, let's get into our presentation. So the goal of this workshop is for you to have some expertise in crafting tailored AI prompts that address specific state and local government policy analysis and program evaluation needs to be able to apply these techniques through these interactive exercises. And the way I'd like to do that in this case is for each of I'm going to go through an examples of all sorts of different kinds. And so for every time that I go through my example, what I'd like you to do is think about some example from your workplace or something maybe you'd like to do in the future, and think about how you would apply that prompt. How would you modify that prompt for whatever work it is that you're doing? And then also sort of talking about how to implement this and integrate the tools into your daily workflows. So I'm a solo entrepreneur. I run my own business. I don't have research assistants and things like that, except occasionally when I do consulting work for a university, and then I might have some students or postdocs and things like that. So as a result, I do understand all the challenges that are involved with, maybe being the only one, if anybody, or maybe the first time who does policy analysis or program evaluation. Because you don't have a lot of resources available to you. And I will say that I started using Chat GPT at the very beginning, which is, I don't know how long ago now, maybe a couple of years ago. And it has evolved a great deal since that time. So the first thing I'll tell you is if you have used any of these tools like a year or so ago, you will be almost shocked at the degree to which they have changed from a year ago until today. So don't take any sort of things that happened in the past as being an indicator of their utility today. And the other thing I will tell you is that they are still constantly changing. So I cannot almost tell you, like I said, I use these tools almost every single day. And every time I log on, something is different with some of them. Okay. And this is both good and bad. Sometimes I like their changes. Sometimes I don't like their changes. But it does sometimes make consistency useful. So I'm giving all these examples as of today. We are in May 2025. I cannot promise that in June 2025, these particular tools will be the best, or these particular prompts will work. However, overall, I've pretty much consistently been able to get them to work. So I think you'll be able to use them in the future, but it's always kind of keep that in mind. Okay, so these are some of the very common tools that are out there. When they're at the beginning, there was ChatGPT, and then then there were other competitors. Like Google used to have one called Bard. I never liked Bard. However, I am liking Gemini. I was very reluctant to use Gemini. But now one really good thing is they now, when you go to your Google search engine, at the very top, sometimes they'll give you basically the Gemini AI results. So it's very easy, very free. Still not as good sometimes as some of the other ones for a long-term analysis, but for quick questions and things like that, it's so much better than it was like even say 6 months ago. Claude is another one that's out there. I used to like Claude. Now I don't like it quite as much, primarily because it's not as up to date as either ChatGPT or Gemini. And I can tell that because I just did something the other day, and it was about it was related to who is president of the United States, and it was something related to President Trump, and they could only talk about President Trump in the past because they did not recognize yet that President Trump was president. Right? Because sometimes the data only goes to maybe it's like 2 or 3 months old. I'm sorry, I just realized I have that's Copilot. I'm missing an L there for Copilot. So Copilot is something I personally did not use because I just didn't want to pay the extra money for it. But I know a lot of organizations have Copilot as a free service because they're part of like an enterprise thing with Microsoft. Well, I'm happy to say that Microsoft has decided that the rest of us out there, like myself, also can have access to Copilot. And I'm not going to use it in this particular case, primarily because this is something that is where it's like more of an inquiry-based analysis technique. But what I do use Copilot for is when I write something, even if I write it in Google Docs, I'll copy it over to Word, and Copilot will be there. And I'll ask Copilot, okay, tell me 10 ways this document can be improved. Say it's an executive summary that I've written. And it does a very good job of telling me ways that I can improve it. So at least so far for me, I have found it best for those kinds of things, like trying to suggest improvements on written documents. Um, but I'm sure there's more out there, but for me, it's a relatively new tool because I didn't really have access to it earlier because I just wasn't willing to pay for it. Now, the other one that has also changed a great deal, and I actually use more in my demonstration today than I would have in the past, even just from a month or two ago, is Perplexity. So Perplexity is a tool where they really focus on references and citations. So I was quite excited at the beginning because that was a challenge I had with, say, ChatGPT at the beginning. But they have changed, and they are now much, much better. You can go to a specific mode, like a research mode, where they will give you like a list of citations. There's still some challenges, and I'm going to tell you how to get around some of those challenges. But I think, like I said, it's a lot better, definitely, than it was like even say several months ago. If you want to do things that are sort of research, analytical, understanding what's happening, sort of more on the academic side of things. But again, you still have to be careful with it. Okay, so here's some basic principles of use. Okay, so this is the something that is probably the most important thing I'm going to tell you today. Is you need to think of all these tools, it doesn't matter which kind it is, that if you think about them as an eager assistant rather than a genius consultant. Because I would say that, maybe 80% of the time, they do a pretty good job. 20% of the time, it's not great. Now, in my career in DC and in academia, I've had a million interns, fellows, all sorts of people, and who have acted basically as my eager assistants, right? And this includes, when I was at the National Academy of Sciences, when I was in the White House, when I was at a university, and anybody who has worked with interns or fellows, or maybe been an intern or fellow yourself, know that they're not going to get it right all the time. Why? Because they're learning. right? They're learning about, like what this complex world is. They're learning how to do stuff. They're learning how to work with you. And so it's really important that you understand that they're an eager system. And the tendency of all these engines is to try to make you happy. And sometimes in trying to make you happy, they produce things that are incorrect. And like I said, I've seen this happen before with real life students, right? So that's why it's really important to recognize that even though it seems like everything produces is brilliant and wonderful and so forth, you got to always take it with a grain of salt. So that's probably the most important thing I want to get across. Okay, so these are sort of things where, I'm just saying user beware, always understand what the data sources are, areas of potential bias, fact check whatever it is. There will be some limitations and hallucinations. So do check to see if it makes sense with reality. Like I did, like I said, literally, this isn't something I did 2 days ago, and I couldn't figure out why I kept putting President Trump in the past tense. And I finally looked at it and realized that it did not recognize President Trump as president yet. Understand that the degree of which, think about the degrees interpretability, transparency. So one big change that ChatGPT, for example, has made is as you put in like your prompt, they basically show you how the computer is thinking about whatever it is. It's like kind of both totally cool and totally weird, right? But if you actually read those things as they flash by, it gives you some idea about how it is they're thinking, like things like date limitations, like how far back their data goes and things like that, what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, and so forth. That was a problem, by the way, I had with Gemini at the beginning, is it kept telling, I do a lot of policy work, and it did not want to do any of my policy related work. It just saying, hey, I don't want to get into that. Well, that doesn't help me very much, even though I do neutral policy analysis. You need to know the context and nuances. That's really true for all policy analysis. So keep in mind, these are international engines. They're used all over the world. They don't always have, say, a US perspective, a US state perspective, much less a town or community perspective. And keep in mind, sort of ethical considerations. And there's been a million Innovate US thing, workshops on all these things. The most important thing is to keep in mind, from my perspective, are issues related to privacy. So any data that you upload, you definitely want to make sure it doesn't have anything identifiable by person, because it will be picked up and it will go into the big giant, engine in the sky that puts all this stuff together. Okay, so why should you use it for this type of work that I'm talking about today, which is policy analysis, program evaluation, community engagement? So the first is it really helps you synthesize information. So you can give it like a PDF upload, like in ChatGPT is probably where I do this the most, is, I can upload a bill that's like 100 pages and ask me to summarize 10 key points that are related to science and technology or related to Pennsylvania or whatever it is, right? And it's something that you certainly could do, but it could take you a really long time. It can also distill academic research, and I'm going to show you some examples of this. I personally feel that despite all its challenges, I think that a person plus one of these tools will have better quality analysis, because all of us are biased, just like the AI tools are. And every time that I have, like when I've done workshops, in-person workshops with, say, policy analysts and say like in a room, they always say, oh, I didn't think of that, or I didn't think of this, right? And that's because it's just like having a sounding board. And a colleague will say to you, oh, but what about, did you think about this? And you think, oh no, well, I don't have colleagues as a solo entrepreneur, so therefore it's really helpful for me to have that feedback, and that definitely improves the quality of my analysis. Another issue is like open-ended surveys. I did a very interesting study where looking at community engagement related to carbon dioxide, reduction activities. I interviewed a whole bunch of people, and then I had to bring together those like 20 some open-ended interviews into tables of some kind or another that brought things together. And what I did is I uploaded that data. Again, this is all anonymized data into ChatGPT, and I asked it to categorize it, analyze it, synthesize it, all sorts of things. And it did a really good job. Now, was it perfect? No. But did it save me a lot of time? Yes. It probably got maybe 75% of the job done. And so then I was able to go through and improve it to my standard. It also helps for things when you're trying to do explainers. So, you can take one of your documents, say that you have a policy proposal that you'd like community feedback on, and you can put it into ChatGPT and say, write me a summary of this suitable for the sixth grade reading level of in 100 words or less. And it can do it. Now, again, is it perfect? No, but it's pretty close, and it's probably better than I could do, because in case my bias is, I don't think that I talk at a high level, but believe me, my friends, my family back in Texas say, hey, we have no idea what you're talking about half the time. And then I think it also levels the playing field. So I work a lot in West Virginia. That's a state that has very, very limited resources, particularly at the local level in many cases. Very small towns, they barely have even a mayor. And all state agencies and local agencies are understaffed. And all of a sudden something happens in your community and you have to do something really quickly. There's a flood in North Carolina, whatever it is. Then you have to sometimes really quickly do things, and you want to be able to, be competitive with other organizations out there doing analysis. And so I think it really helps. Sorry, I keep on hitting the thing. Okay, so here's some principles for good AI prompts. First, frame the mission, then the ask. You really, just like in all policy analysis or program evaluation, community engagement, framing is probably the most important step, and that's where you really should spend a lot of time. You want to map the data terrain. So a good amount of this analysis is going to be limited by what data is available. This is both nationally, state, locally, whatever it is that you have. So you really need to understand what data you have and the limitations of the data. You want to think about the audience and what voice you want to have. In other words, are you trying to communicate to policymakers, to experts, things like that? Who is the audience for your analysis? You want to think about the format and the scope of what it is you do. And you want to make sure that you have a verification as part of it. Okay, so here's some example prompts that you might use. What I want to emphasize is notice how specific and how quantitative these are. So a 250-word executive summary of this budget, highlighting these three largest allocations and the return on investment. Look at these 3,000 open-ended surveys on this particular project into thematic categories and surface the top 5 concerns. Review this ordinance in everyday English at 8th grade reading, added 1 sentence Spanish translation for each section, and suggest a social media post, right? So these are all very, very specific, and you're going to get your best quality analysis if you provide that level of specificity. Okay, so for any of you who have taken one of my workshops here before, I focus on these 4 E's in analysis. That's effectiveness, the degree to which a societal goal is likely to be met. This is true for program evaluations, which look at the past, or policy analysis, which looks at the future. Efficiency is what gets the best bang for the societal buck. Equity is the fairness of the policy, that who are the winners, who are the losers, and there's always winners and always losers in every policy. And ease of acceptability, which is not about the political atmosphere as much as the degree to which the key players, the key stakeholders support or oppose a policy. This is true both the degree that they care about a particular policy. In other words, like, does it reach their agenda, as well as on the current policy and on different policy options. When you do your prompts, always ask for links and citations so you can verify the information and the timeliness. And with that, I'm going to go to looking at the case study I have today. So this is a real analysis that I'm conducting right now it's under a Build Back Better grant that was given to a lot of people, a lot of organizations within the state of West Virginia, where I do a lot of consulting. And my little teeny tiny focus is looking at former mine lands and ways to turn them into sustainable lands. And within that, I've done about 20 different, working with students and postdoc and so forth, 20 different topic areas. One of those topic areas is looking at having data centers on former mine lands. And this is a big issue in West Virginia. It's a big issue in many states because there's a desperate desire for data centers to support things like all these AI tools. But they're posing a lot of challenges. In West Virginia, there has been a fair amount of activity on one that has been recently proposed. And the governor has gotten involved, the legislature has been involved. So it's a big issue, data centers in general. But even within that, I'm primarily focusing on one aspect of it, which is looking at former mine lands, but in this particular geographic region. So I did a whole series, I can't remember, maybe a year or two ago, for Innovate US on program evaluation. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on what is program evaluation, but you can always go back to the video of that series if you'd like to know more. When I teach it, I use the CDC model. And basically what a program evaluation does is it's looking at a program to see, is it working or is it not working? And so you're kind of looking at the past. And the goal is either to prove the program is doing a good job and doesn't need changes, or maybe figuring out that there's greater demand than you might expect, that you didn't expect initially, so maybe you want more money. Or maybe you're just trying to justify it because they want to shut down the program and you got to say, hey, sort of people care about it. Okay, so one of the most important things for any of these questions is to look at which of these models is best for your question. So I'm going to go through some of them so you can sort of see at least how I approach this issue. Okay, so I took my question and I just asked, this is ChatGPT, for for 10 sorry. Sorry, I lost my thing here. Oops. Yeah, there we go. Sorry. So I asked it for 10 possible ChatGPT prompts for conducting a program evaluation about locating data centers on former mine lands in West Virginia. And I looked at these questions, the answers to this, and I thought, okay, this is not going to work. ChatGPT does not understand at all what it is that I'm looking for. So I moved on from ChatGPT and I went over to Google, and so I could use their Gemini tool. And so I put the same exact question in, and here I got exactly like what I wanted. So I just put in exactly the same question, identified 10 prompts, and it broke them up into categories. And then on the right-hand side here, I can tell that it's using the latest data because it's doing things from April to March 2025, which is a big issue on this topic, because they just passed legislation but the governor may or may not sign it, things like that related to data center. So for example, here is analyze the potential economic benefits and drawbacks of incentivizing data center development on former minelands in West Virginia, considering job creation, tax revenue, and potential strain on local infrastructure. So that is definitely the heart of the question that is occurring in West Virginia. So I know it's going on the right track. Then this is just further down in this, which is look at things like on job displacement, property values, noise and light pollution, quality of life. Like, so that's good because those, like I've read the local newspaper articles and these are things that have come up. So I know, again, it's relevant. And then I just thought this was useful. They kind of give some tips at the end to think about the type of program evaluation, who the evaluation is for, and whether you want a summary, report, list of recommendations, that kind of thing. Okay, so the second thing is to focus the evaluation question and design. Okay, so I took one of those ChatGPT prompts and I put it back into Google, and I did not like what this response was. And the reason why is because the things, that first one here, that's my work, right? And then the next thing is also, I also know this work from West Virginia. So I'm not getting new information, right? I'm getting information that I myself have been some way involved with, or the institution I'm working for has been involved with. So it's not going to give me new information. So I moved on from Gemini and I went to Perplexity. Okay, so I took the question about analyzing the potential economic benefits and drawbacks on former minelands. All this questions, one of those questions from the things. And then this I want to give you as an example. This is like where it will flash things on the screen telling you how it's thinking. Where it says, I need to search the web to find this. I need to look at how data is impacting energy and water infrastructure. I need to look at the typical water usage, things like that. And as you see all those little icons at the bottom, including, by the way, that scitechpolicy.wv, that's the organization I was working for, I can tell, okay, these are reasonable like data sources in West Virginia. Okay, and then it gave me a report, and the report is pretty long. Now, what I want you to focus on is not as much as words, but over here where it says sources, and see it says 108 sources. So I can go back and I can look at those 108 sources, and it'll give me a pretty good reference list for whatever it is that I'm doing. And I'm looking at this, and I read this and thought, okay, well, yeah, this is a pretty good summary. And then I look at reference 26. So I go back to that reference list that I mentioned earlier. I click on that, and reference 26 is the bill that was just discussed in West Virginia. Okay, so I know, good deal. This is good quality information. I can go back when I actually put all these pieces together, read that bill, make sure all the data points match that Perplexity has read the bill correctly. So it says, like here it says 50 new jobs. Look at the bill to make sure it says 50 new jobs, not like 5 new jobs or 500 new jobs. That's a big deal because one concern is that some of the data centers only produce like 5 new jobs. So that's a big issue in terms of the analysis I'm doing. So here is just kind of going further. This kind of gives some of the site issues, which is important for me, where it talks about like large, relatively flat land, which is relevant because of the former minelands sometimes are not large, relatively flat lands, at least in West Virginia. Then here it talks about the economic benefits, citing that same study. Now, I wanted to give you an example of like where I went, on the data source. And this has led me to make a change later. So here it is, and it has this thing about how much water is used. And then the site that did is this Reddit. I thought, Reddit? I mean, like, really? So I went and clicked on the Reddit, and it is the one above it there, where it says a typical data center uses between this much, and it's BBC Today. Okay. So that tells me that it's not as bad as I thought when I saw Reddit, but it's also not that great because it's water in the UK, it's from a UK source, it's not very academic. And so I definitely cannot use that particular number in my analysis. So I'm going to have to go another way, another direction to find find that number. But at least going back to my original principles, there's transparency there now. Before there wasn't transparency, they'd just put the number and you wouldn't know where the number came from. Now I know where the number comes from. In this case, it's not, it does not meet my standards. And so I will like move on to something else. And then I think this is also good. Again, this is going back to the kind of brainstorming idea where it's saying, okay, well, here's some related questions. And so I might look at this and say, oh yeah, I need to think about tax revenue. So even though there might not be a lot of jobs from a data center, if you're a local community, if you bring a lot of revenue to a very poor community, that will help them build a new school or recreation center or hospital or something, then I need to make sure that I conclude that. So it's a good board on that. Okay, so here's another example where the engine didn't quite do what I wanted. So this is Claude. This is one of the other ones. I used to like Claude quite a lot about 6 months ago. I have now tried it several times since, and I have not liked the results. And this is a good reason why. So you'll see here, provide a list of data centers in the United States that are on former mine lands with links and citations. Okay, so this is what they gave me. The problem with this is I wanted data centers that were on former mine lands, and it decided to give me data centers that are in mines as opposed to on mine lands, which is a totally different thing. And is far, far more complex. And that's what they did, for pretty much all these examples. And I thought, okay, well, I don't have enough time to fool with you, Claude, to get the right answer to this question. I'm moving on. And so I have not used Claude for the remainder of this analysis, but I did at one point like Claude. Okay, so now we're going to developing and asking questions, looking at the program evaluation criteria. And so I'm going now to Perplexity. Now, again, Perplexity is the engine that's supposed to help you if you're like me and you need a lot of data and citations, very fact-based kinds of things. And so when I teach program evaluation, I focus on the 3 E's, which are effectiveness, equity, and efficiency. And so I'm saying from the perspective of a policymaker, and that's very important, it's a really good tool that you can use in almost all of these engines so that people know your audience. If you might remember, that's one of the fundamental principles is knowing who your audience is. So in this case, I'm thinking I'm writing something, it's for the West Virginia legislature, the West Virginia governor, the executive branch. So from the perspective of a policymaker, analyze the pros and cons of the effectiveness, equity, and efficiency of existing data centers in the United States, provide links and citations, but I also add, because of the earlier issue about Reddit, I say only use academic analysis. And that's a constraint. So I'm going to get less references. So before it's trying to make me happy by giving me a lot of references, but I care about the quality of those analyses. And so therefore that I'm going to focus on academic analysis. And it puts together a pretty good pro-con list of the effectiveness, efficiency, and equity of these different things. And you'll see here, there's like the little numbers after it. All those little numbers are the citations for where they got this information, which I will go back and, look at when I actually put everything together. And like I said, here is the efficiency. Here is equity issues. Equity did not do a great job on, I would say. So it means, to me, it means I need to teach a little bit more about equity analysis. But it does, at least on the con side, it did a better job where it says 68% of Virginia data centers are located near low-income communities. And so I can sort of see a topic there that needs to be addressed. And then it produces a nice little table of different policy trade-offs in terms of the opportunities and the risks that are involved. And again, you can see the citations there at the bottom. And so here is a list of like what these citations are. These are pretty good organizations in terms of, like in other words, I have some awareness of who these particular sources are. I will go back and actually read the reports, but I do have a lot more confidence analysis in terms of their data sources. Okay, so now moving on to policy analysis. So this is my book here, From Expertise to Impact. I do give away free PDFs for workshop folks. I'll try to remember to, I'll give the link to the Innovate US folks and send out in the follow-up email. But you can get a real copy of it on Amazon for $10. And these are all the different steps, like 1 through 10. I'm going to focus primarily on these sort of middle steps, which are the analysis steps in this presentation. Okay, so the first thing we do is identify the questions that should be part of the policy analysis. So again, I went back to Google / Gemini and asked it for prompts. And it gave, again, a pretty good list of questions for policy analysis, but I was not quite happy in that it did not really look at, say, policy options, which is a lot of what you do in policy analysis, look at different policy options. But again, it gave a pretty good set of sources here, some of which, again, are my own sources. So here we talk about looking at the effectiveness of existing Western policies for managing development of data centers and so forth. Okay, well, that's good. That is something that I would do as part of my analysis. So remember, this is the prompt. So I can put this prompt into, one of the engines. I probably would at this point, I think, like I said, I haven't had much luck with Gemini, so I'm probably going to do Perplexity and use this as a prompt to kind of get an answer. Looking at the legal and regulatory hurdles, that's also important because that's a key part of my analysis. I'm supposed to identify those hurdles, so I can identify policy options to overcome those hurdles. So these are, for me, a pretty good set of questions. Their tips: be specific, do follow-up, which is, I agree, really important to do follow-up questions, and look at multiple perspectives, which you sort of talked about earlier. So the second big part of a policy analysis, besides identifying the question, is to figure out the possible policy options. So I tried this in ChatGPT. And so ChatGPT knows me pretty well at this point because I've been using it for over a year. And I asked it, what are 3 possible policy options to respond to the challenges posed by public concerns on the use of water by data centers impacting local communities? And I picked this particular topic because I know that that is the crux of the current debate in West Virginia, where there's a data center that they want to put in a local community, and the community is objecting because about water concerns. So it came up with 3 options, which is tighten the water efficiency standards with a use it twice rule, using offering tax incentives and fast track zoning if they reclaim wastewater. So again, trying to reduce their use of fresh drinking water, and then some sort of tariff on large industrial withdrawals. So not a bad set of policy options in terms of different economic mechanisms. Okay, then I asked it, have any of these policy options been used in the real world? Now, this is a question I use a lot because it'll come up with anything. And you want to figure out, okay, has anybody ever actually done this, or is this just in somebody's head it could be some scientific article or something somewhere. But what I care about in my work is things that are real, where people have tried them. So when I'm doing program evaluation or policy analysis, I have some sort of data to draw upon, the factual basis for my analysis. And you'll see here that it did identify, like, for this, the regulatory stick option with mandated metering, something in Singapore, like a bill that's in Oregon. For the reclaimed water, let me see, there's something in Virginia. Virginia is really active on data centers, so that's probably most useful to me, because also it's a real big hub. It's like where most of the data centers, I think, in the United States are located. Then this thing in Utah, which is also sort of interesting. I hadn't heard of that one before, so that brought up something that I probably would not have known otherwise, except for it coming up in the search. And then here are these same sort of things in Loudoun and in Virginia. So I will go and look up those citations, read what's happening there, see what data analysis they have to kind of help me do my analysis. So the next thing is to evaluate the possible policy options based on those predetermined criteria. For me, it's always going to be those 4 E's. For you, it might be other things, but you need to figure out for any analysis you do what your criteria are. So this is, like what I teach, like you'll see this in my book, a pro-con analysis for each of the possible options based on the 4 E's. I provide citations and links, and then I say focus on the use of academic and government sources of information. And the reason I add in government is because a lot of the work I do in West Virginia, we do as a comparison with what's happening in other Appalachian states. So, we'll look a lot at what's happening in Kentucky and Tennessee and so forth. And it's like California, for example, is not going to be very useful for us. Singapore is not going to be very useful for us. It needs to be something where it's very similar to what it is we have. But for now, I'm not even putting the Appalachian limitation. I'm just saying that I'm going to take government sources of information as well as academic, because a lot of the work in the public policy sphere is from what's called the gray literature, which are government reports and things like that that don't go through peer review, but have lots of useful sources of information. So it created a pretty good chart, I think, here, looking at the pros and the cons of each of these different options. I'm just like, this is for one of them. This is the equity and ease for a different one, just so you can sort of see, what they are like. And I think like on this equity analysis one, they did a pretty good job, better job, I think, than earlier, because this is something that can come up a lot, that communities without data center clusters get no offsetting dividends, widening geographic disparities in water infrastructure, which is a really, really big issue in West Virginia, because a lot of communities have either no public water, rely on wells, all sorts of different things. Okay, so then another thing you can do is you can take the perspective of policymakers and the interested public. And this is really helpful for you to sort of understand, what things I might want to include in my analysis to preempt so that I'm ready, right, whenever this analysis comes out. So this is like take the position of the West Virginia governor as of 2025. I did that because there's a new governor in West Virginia in 2020 as of January. What questions might they have about the potential policy options? And I think these are pretty good list of questions. What statutory authority does the Department of Environmental Protection have to set water use disclosures? How credible are the water saving figures? Given that this is like wells and things like that that are heavily used, what are some of the costs that developers, would face? Then I did it like environmental groups. What questions might they have? Will the mandatory disclosures include real-time reporting withdrawals, include discharge temperatures, chemical additives, so that can be audited. I know that's really important because I've done a lot of work on shale gas since I've been living here for over 10 years now in southwestern Pennsylvania. And chemical additives are a really big issue during that debate. How will enforcement be funded and staffed? Then I take the position of a community in West Virginia with limited water resources. Again, so there's a real community that we're talking about here. What questions might they have about the potential policy options? They might know, like, how will data center withdrawals be limited during drought declarations? What guarantees will there be real-time information? Will there be will any policy cap the total gallons permitted for industrial cooling before new supplies, such as reclaimed water, wastewater, are brought online? Okay, so that is program evaluation. And now let's get into the last category, which is community engagement. So this is, community engagement can mean all sorts of different things to people. I decided to use this definition, which is from the CDC, because that's primarily what I do, at least when I do community engagement, and I've done quite a bit of it in West Virginia, which is a process of working collaboratively with and through groups of people affiliated by geographic proximity, special interest, or similar situations to just issues affecting the well-being of those people. So the first thing I want to do is identify stakeholders and key actors. So I find this is one of the most important steps because, again, when I've done this with groups, I do workshops like all over the country. People tend to like stereotype and just will pick the same groups. And they don't really think of all the groups. And you know what? There's nothing that will make a stakeholder the matter than you went and said you did a stakeholder engagement and community engagement strategy, but somehow you forgot them and they didn't hear about it until it's too late. And that will make them mad. So I think this is one of the most important steps when you do these things. And so, I will identify my own list based on the research and things that I have done, but I always like to go and check it out and say, okay, who might I be missing from whatever that list is? And sometimes it can also be hard to find them. So sometimes, like I was doing something related to like public health in West Virginia. And so I would go to these things and like ask them to identify like a dozen organizations. And again, most of these organizations are small. They don't have web pages. They don't have anything. So it can be really, really hard to identify them. Okay, so like I said, I always give a number. If like something like this, I almost always will use at least 10. Sometimes I'll use 20 just to make sure I don't miss anybody. But this is obviously local government leaders, but a lot of people might not have thought about the surface and mineral property owners, but that's actually a really, really big issue on the former mine land space. Mining companies, electric utilities, data center developers, I think those are a little bit more obvious. Local community groups, residents, environmental nonprofits. People might not think about some of these other ones though, like education institutions, labor and workforce, economic development agencies. And like I said, I probably in this one, if I'd had more, like if I wasn't doing a presentation, I probably would even said 20, just to make sure I wasn't like missing anybody. But it will give you 20, right? But it doesn't mean there are actually 20. But my goal is just to look at it as a list. So the way I primarily collect data is through focus groups and surveys. And so I asked it to brainstorm questions for focus groups with stakeholders on these issues. So this is sort of a list, like what are your initial thoughts and concerns? How do you see this project impact the local economy, environmental considerations, benefits, risks, and challenges? How can local residents and businesses best participate? Now, I think this one's important. So when I did a study, this is for a national organization on this about participation, there's a great variance across the country on this particular issue. So it's really important to ask the community themselves how they would like to participate. You definitely can't assume anything. What is the role of local government regulators? That's also been a big issue in the community engagement things that I have done. Some places they do not trust their local government. They want to have like their own independent scientist or a nonprofit or an academic do it. So there can be definitely variance in that by community. How important is include workforce training education? Again, based on the study I did, this, for places where there's a lot of young people who need jobs, it's really important. For areas where there's more retirement kind of communities, they really don't care about workforce training. What community engagement strategies would they recommend? So I think, again, it's important to ask them, not assume what works, but ask them what they think would work. And what you are looking at for sort of 5 or 10 years. Now, I'm sure over time, I probably could have come up with all these questions, but this was probably a more thoughtfully worded set that took, I don't know, maybe 15 seconds for perplexity in this case to come up with. So I think it really helps in terms of saving time. Okay, so here's some survey questions. So I broke these up into quantitative questions because I always, when I do survey work, like to have a mix of quantitative and qualitative questions. So like this one on a scale of 1 to 10, how supportive of you of building a data center? How concerned are you about environmental impacts? How likely do you think we'll create jobs? How much do you trust the local government and developers? I probably would break that up. Put local developers in one, local government in one, and developers in the other. How important is it that it can include community benefits? Again, I'd probably break that one up too. Here's some like open-ended questions, like what's your main hopes and concerns? Do you think it can affect the environment? How would you like it to benefit local residents? That's probably one of the most important ones based on the work that I've done in this area because it varies so much. What do you need to feel confident about the project? How do you envision the future of your community? So this is, I tend to find that people want the quantitative data, but in terms of what will really impact policy, it's more this qualitative data. And so say that this is like 100 residents respond to this, I can take their results, again, anonymized, I can put them in one of these engines and I can get them to summarize them into like 5 key things. So it really helps in the synthesis of that data. And I've obviously read through them and everything else, but it just helps in terms of doing it, takes out my own personal bias and what I emphasize. Okay, and then another one is identify the methods of community engagement for the geographic region. So this is a big issue in West Virginia because a lot of people in this case don't have internet access and they have no public transportation. About half of West Virginia does not have any public transportation at all. So things like attending a meeting can be really challenging. Sending an electronic survey is not going to get you very far. So it's good to kind of brainstorm ideas. Local newspapers and radio doesn't necessarily work very well these days. Though sometimes there's some free things, but there's not a lot of media in West Virginia at all. There's a few good things. There's a few. It's not really as much local newspapers, right? But there's a few like West Virginia specific online kind of news, and that's really where you get most of the information. And there's like one major newspaper in the state, the Charleston Gazette. The second one is the one that I have used the most, which is partner with local organizations and trusted community leaders. There's usually already some sort of meeting or something that's happening. And so they have a constituency. I'll contact them and say, hey, would you be willing to host a meeting or either give me 30 minutes at an existing meeting to talk about these issues? I'll give some sort of, ideally, if the grant allows it, I'll give some sort of incentive like a free $25 grocery gift card or something like that. Again, this is if you have existing community events, like county fairs, school functions, farmers markets, those are also really good ways. You can distribute printed versions, and you can do small in-person meetings. So over time, I have done all of these for different aspects, depending on what the particular client wants and what their budget allows. Okay, so that is the end of my presentation. I'm just going to tell you a few things here, just in case you're interested. So I do a lot of activities on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with me, always just go to LinkedIn and you can connect or follow me. One of the things that I do that's most popular these days, because so many people are looking for jobs, is a free weekly newsletter, which usually has about 100 science, technology, policy, job openings in it. A lot of these people, by the way, are looking for jobs in state and local government. They're kind of hard to find. So ideally somebody will send me that they have an opening through a post on LinkedIn, And then I can re-advertise it to my audience here, which is right now about 2,500 people. I also have an opinion newsletter. This is something about the work I do at the sort of the state level, this particular issue of it, but I'm generally talking about what's going on. So that's called Informant Influence. And then again, for job seekers, I have this weekly co-working space where you can sign up and be with other people who are looking for employment in the science and technology policy world, which I realize not all of you in science and technology policy, but for those of you who are, like in public health, uh, you know, anything that's related to energy, environment, DEI, all these things, then I thought you guys might be interested in this. Is something I just started up a few weeks ago. And otherwise, here is my webpage where you can find out more on all these different activities and learn more about me.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I know we are at the hour, but I did